Good morning, moms of Master Books. Hope you're having a fantastic week. I am joined today by author Craig Froman. He is also an editor. You know those pictures where you have a saint and then a halo around their head? You have that going on today.
Oh, I do.
If you
look
sit
at
just
that.
right,
Whoa.
you kind of have the halo.
Oh, wow. That looks good.
Yeah.
I like that. Let's capture that for some reason. I don't know what.
Well, Craig is an editor here at Master Books, and so he deals with a lot of new submissions. He deals with a lot of the projects that come in. He wrote My Story 1 and 2. You wrote the Atlas of the World, right? Children's Atlas.
Passport to the World.
And then the Passport book.
Right.
And then you're in the process, actually, of writing an American or a U.S. Atlas.
Yes.
And a U.S. passport.
Yeah. So that'll be a new course coming up next spring.
Yeah, so that's pretty exciting too. So Craig deals a lot with the curriculum writing process and authors and different things. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to him about today, especially we'll talk about my story, but it's more about the Master Books method. And I think sometimes it's one of the most misunderstood components of Master Books. Like, we understand the open and go aspect. We understand removing friction points, putting the burden of education on the student. But what we sometimes miss is the more holistic approach, the more whole-brained approach that Master Books utilizes. And I'll look at posts, and every now and then I'll see a post where somebody is saying, I don't understand this. My kid doesn't like copy work. My kid doesn't like this, so we don't do it. And we think that curriculum is a tool that the parents should definitely make your own. But I wouldn't rule something out that's part of the learning process just because you haven't seen it before.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's a lot that what we build into it, I think, is that aspect of growth for different perspectives. And I'm hoping that that's what this time together we can kind of talk about how children learn differently. Of course, adults learn differently. We probably learn and grow differently than our children do. And so understanding those different perspectives, I think, can help see why something like copywork or even art. I've had some parents say that they just skip the artwork because it just seems like a waste of time. But we've realized that there's, especially for young children that are just developing their skills and understanding and learning and growing, there's certain things that even with coloring, you are developing their skill in just kinesthetic reasons to be able to hold a crayon or hold a pencil and to write. It's an important skill that you already have as a parent, but you need to see that kind of carries on to the child as well, and that these simple things can really be very powerful developmentally for the kids.
Yeah. Well, attached there is a link on the description for a My Story teaching notes that Craig wrote. We're going to talk about that a little bit today, but you can actually download this for free from clicking that link, or if you go to My Story on the website, we also have it linked there as well. When I had gone back to school and with another career where I would travel and I would go and train companies. And when I was, the course that I took was an adult training course. And the professor who was there was so unique. And so he did a lot of different things. Like, he had the Wizard of Oz playing on a black and white TV behind him the entire semester. And he gave us all rubber balls to squeeze while we talked and all these different things. And it was so bizarre because it was so far outside the box than the way we had ever been in a classroom. Like, every other classroom is information in, information out. In this classroom, he had us do these strange exercises, like we'd have to get up and march around the room, or, just different stuff, right? And at the end of the class, he finally unpacked it all. And he explained like why the Wizard of Oz was there is because we take mental field trips, and that helped keep us in the room. And why he gave us the rubber balls was because some people actually need to be doing something physically while they're learning to make connections to the brain. He had music playing at different points, and or had us singing little songs or different. It was the corniest class, but in all my years of college and school, I remember almost every one of those classes. And it's because he involved all the intelligences that people learn with. And I know you address that here, so I'll let you talk a little bit about that.
Well, yeah. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this yet. You can look at it later if not just now. But on the second page there, and this particular portion, this text here came from one of our books, The Elementary Anatomy, and it deals with the 8 areas of intelligence. And so we can just kind of look at those real quickly. There's the intrapersonal, so that's kind of the internal learner. They're called self-wise, so they're very introspective. They look into themselves. There's areas then as you go through this from my story that connect to each of these intelligences, each of the ways that children, the ways that adults learn as well. There's the verbal linguistic, so those are the ones that like words. They're going to want to read. They're going to want to speak or to share. Not everyone's going to learn that way. The visual spatial learners, they're picture-wise. I'm definitely lean that way. I lean several ways. The verbal linguistic way, the visual spatial way. I love books, but I love books with pictures. There's the music-wise, so these are the ones who can pick up a tune naturally. There's also different connections with my story. I saw that being a part of the language learning, because the languages can be, in a sense, sort of a musical way, the way you phrase things, the way you say things, the way you hear that, then the way you learn that can be along this line of the musical. The body kinesthetic, these people have a good physical awareness. When I was a child, I would, after school, I would just stay outside until nightfall. I loved being out in nature, and I still love being out in my garden at home. But those are the ones that need to be kind of moving, like Randy was saying, or squeezing the ball, something they can't sit still. And I know when I was a child in school, they really didn't have the medications necessarily. It seems like now they almost over medicate children at times, but a lot of those I think just need some movement. They're not bad kids. They just, that's the way they're wired, is to move. And so when you're kind of a lot of times in a public school setting, you're forced to just sit because you've got to kind of match every other child. In a homeschool setting, where we found with our kids, there's that freedom to really kind of minister and bless them with the fact that they don't have to just sit still for 7 or 8 hours or whatever it is at
in fact, for some people whose kids, they think they're just bouncing off the walls, sometimes it's okay to those mini trampolines. I know the school that I had gone to was a private school, and they actually had one of those in the classroom for first and second graders, and the kids would bounce as they were learning. Some of the kids they needed to have that physical connection to their learning.
Well, I have seen recently, I guess they've got like little chairs. I think it's on the chair itself where there's like a little pedal. Yeah. And you can kind of move.
Just have some movement going.
And that helps them learn. If they're body kinesthetic learner, they kind of need that to keep from just kind of losing it basically in the learning process. The interpersonal learners, they're people-wise. They're ones that really like to interact with people. The logical math ones, not myself. They are logic-wise. They like the connections that they see in math and things. And the naturalists, those are the ones, again, that like to go outside, like to be in nature. They learn well when they're outside. There was some friends of ours that moved to Colorado, and there's a place up there where everything they do education-wise is outside. I don't know how they can quite do that, but it's because they're connected to nature, and that helps, I think, in ways as well. So parts of the My Story experience and some of our other courses as well take you outside or take you to a library or let you kind of learn in a different environment. You're not just in one room kind of environment, but you really learn from that. And I think that's just really important to understand that children, you may or may not see where your children are at this current time in these learning styles, but you will as you work with them and as you watch them and as you see them grow, you'll see where they seem to be best. And that's where you can really reach them as a homeschool family, where their needs are and where they grow.
So when we're talking about the different intelligences and the way people learn in business, a lot of times we actually want to be aware of this, because if I'm in a sales presentation and I listen for keywords or certain things, but if somebody says, do you see what I'm saying? I'm having a hard time seeing what you're saying, then you realize that's a very visual learner. And I need to appeal to their visual, because I can talk all day, and if they're not seeing the visual, then they're not going to grasp it. If somebody says, do you hear me? Do you hear what I'm saying? A parent says to a kid, do you hear me? If they say that, that's because they're an auditory learner. That's how they communicate. And when a kid is a visual learner and a parent is an auditory learner, and they're like speaking two different languages. And sometimes as parents, we also have to realize, what is our kids' learning style? Because I may be thinking, can't you hear me? Can't you hear me? Can't you hear me? And no, because their primary learning style is visual. So another key trigger would be, do you understand me? And so when somebody continually speaks that way, then they're speaking more from that kinesthetic and approach. And so you have to then approach the sales pitch differently for the way they're talking. I think as teachers, we also have to do the same. We have to be sensitive to their learning styles are different.
Definitely.
And our teaching style, is different. I will say this, I don't think you should solely cater to their learning style. Our boss has one learning style, right? And it's not always the same as we communicate, but we have to learn to be able to speak in the way that he communicates to know what he wants. And so it's important that our kids, even if their primary learning method is one, that they still have exposure to the other methods.
And that's the thing with my story and some of our other courses as well. It doesn't focus on just one learning method. It tries to, in a way, reach children at any particular level by kind of mixing things up each week. That's a part of what this little printout talks about, is how each one in My Story 1, My Story 2, how each one of the different levels, I won't go through them all necessarily, but like even copy work time. So what is it? It's for those learning to write. It's an opportunity to learn to write and spell words mentioned in the lesson. Why? Why did we make that a part of it? And why is copy work time a part of really any of the Master Books courses? Copy work is meant to help with both cognitive and kinesthetic development. Writing out words or sentences helps one with his or her handwriting, grammar, memorization, spelling. Let it be a vocabulary building activity. And this is the main focus of this is the verbal linguistic learners. So it's important. But I was thinking the other day about how just writing something, and we think it's just such a simple thing, but you're seeing a word, so you're using one part of your brain that you use for your visual learning. You're using your hand to write the word, so you're using a different part of your brain that is developed with the kinesthetic learning skill and the writing skill. If you say it out loud, you're using an auditory part of the learning that helps you learn it even better. So just the more learning styles you can use, the better it is for a child to learn, because no one has just one learning style. We all have several, and we can all learn from the multitude of those. But I remember in college, the majority of the learning that I got was, I'm going to talk to you and you're going to write notes. That was so if you weren't an auditory learner, you were really going to be hurting when it came to trying to learn things in college.
Yeah.
But Yeah.
So in a case like my story, where sometimes it'll feel a little overwhelming because you have multiple learning intelligences
Right.
being addressed, and there's different topics and different things, we're not necessarily looking for memorization. Like, you're not looking for them to take away
Right.
facts and figures. You're creating an awareness and building connections.
Exactly. There's certainly going to be some facts and figures that they will learn. There's lots of facts staggered throughout the book that we researched and such for around the world. But the main focus really is the experience itself in learning to understand different people, different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to, and I think it's one of the first things on the sheet here, that the scripture verse, this was kind of the core of what we wanted to come out of this for children and for families. From what Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second command, he said, is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's really the heart of what this is. So it's the sense of learning to appreciate, to love people. And you do that by understanding them a little bit better in their own culture, in their own setting, but seeing how God loves them as well.
Yeah.
That is what communicates through all the rest of the social studies, things that are learned in my story. Again, the facts and figures, the highest waterfalls or the deepest lakes, those kinds of things that you also learn along the way. But hopefully the heart is what really comes through and what families can learn from this.
So the greatest medicine or remedy to narcissism, which is really self-love at different degrees,
Right.
is empathy. And you can't have empathy until you're able to actually see the world through another person's eyes and appreciate what they're going through and what their experience is. Then that takes the focus off myself and puts it on somebody else. So in my story for this younger elementary, you're basically creating an awareness of all the other cultures and different peoples, and just kind of opening up their world. But it's not, they don't have to actually walk away with, they know everything about those cultures. And I think sometimes we're so used to a world that's geared with testing as an analysis, but we don't necessarily retain it, and we don't actually make the right connections.
I think that's very, very true. I mean, when the whole focus is just memorization, I did well in school. I was in public school. I didn't know of homeschooling until we moved to Missouri, and then our kids were both born there. But so I was in public school, but I didn't have that sense that I could develop and grow other than just learning facts and figures. That's what school was.
Right.
Memorization. I could memorize very well. I did very well with that. But as soon as I was done with the test, I just moved on. And I don't know how valuable that kind of thing really is overall. I mean, obviously, I needed to learn letters and words because that still carries with me. I needed to learn math foundations because that's still something I have to deal with. But the interpersonal kinds of things that came probably more from church and home than from school itself. Whereas in homeschooling, that's a major part of what we're doing. We're learning to appreciate each other, to love each other, to encourage and lift each other.
Yep.
And that's something that I wasn't really able to develop out of the public school system. Yeah.
Now I want to add, so Craig has 2 children. He homeschooled using, at the time, what Master Books Curriculum was available. Yeah. And they successfully went to university. Yeah. Your daughter has graduated from university and is now teaching, right?
Yes, she's actually for years has wanted to teach special education, and she graduated this year. She got a job this year, and we actually wrote in together. But she loves what she's doing. But right, she did very well, and the Lord just really created a heart in her to love, and so that's been exciting to see.
So when you're working with curriculum and you get a new project, you're not just looking at that project. You also see the end goal, because you know what it's like to apply to colleges. You know what
Right.
it's like to have the kids in college and go through all the challenges that they're going to face in even Christian universities, and then to help them launch after college into careers and that.
Right.
So when you
Right.
see a first and second grade social studies curriculum that's talking about the awareness and empathies and all of this for other cultures, you're looking also at, you kind of see the end goal. It's not the immediate of what are they learning in this book at this moment.
Right. You want to see how that's going to develop them as a person at that point, and then to see them grow as they get older. They're going to learn a little bit more, but you really want their heart to be what is most deeply affected.
Yeah.
And their mind. You see them growing in both ways, not just the mind, not just, again, building on facts and figures. You need those to
Right.
help you as you grow older and get into higher level learning. But there's something much, much more valuable to that child, to your own children, you see, that you want to carry through their whole learning experience.
And we also, as a publisher and as home educators and influencers in the culture, have to stay open-minded, because every now and then we'll get a project and it's outside the box. Math K was an outside the box project, because what you expect when you open a Math K book is let's practice writing our numbers and let's practice simple addition and those type of things. What's 1 apple plus 1 apple? And the process was the author said, well, let's build brain skills to prepare them to do math successfully. And because some of us hadn't necessarily seen that approach before, we had to really drill down to ask, what are you trying to accomplish here? And then it's genius once you understand it. It's like, wow, that's like, why doesn't every program use this more inductive, holistic approach to training a child? But it's because it's scary to go outside the box sometimes, to tell people, I'm going to go outside the box, but trust me, when you get back in the box, you're going to know what you're doing because you spent time kind of learning what needed to happen. And I think that's what we see in the homeschool community. We have people who were used to one method and one approach, and then because what we see doesn't match our bias or doesn't match our experience, we reject it and say, no, could never be, because that's not how I learned. But then we have other parents weigh in and say, no, that was the game changer. That was the place where my kid had just clicked. They got it because they saw it. Right brain flashcards is another one that I see that all the time with.
Well, I know with our kids, with what we use to kind of raise them and train them and teach them, some of our friends who were homeschooling at the time, they liked the curriculum that looked very much like what you would find if you just sent them to school, but you would add some element of God to that foundational teaching. But we always tried to stray away, because we thought, well, if we wanted to teach them the way public school teaches them, we would just send them to public school. So I'm glad to see what Master Books is developing. I loved being a part of Math K. That was a joyful experience to see, because I thought, this is what, if my kids were small, this is what I would want to be teaching them. It's a simple thing, but and yet it's profoundly based, I think, through the learning experience that seems simple, but it's way more complex than you think as you start moving through it. Just the shapes, again, teaching them to draw lines, because I teach 3, 4, 5, and 6-year-olds on Sunday morning in a little Sunday school class, and believe me, they have a hard time at times just kind of moving the crayon or moving the pencil, and those are just basic skills that they're going to have to learn as they grow. So you want to do it in a simple way. You want to do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm them or make them frustrated or make them angry. You want them to love the learning experience. And so that's what I loved about working with Math K. I loved working with My Story, because I thought, this is something that feels fun, and yet underlying it, there is that sense that they're learning. And I think the more joy you get out of anything you learn, and that's as a child or as an adult, the more you enjoy it, the more you learn it. If you don't like what you're learning, you're not going to retain it. You might get through it and be able to move on, but you're not going to retain it as well as if it's something you enjoy doing.
Absolutely. And that's the way our brains work anyways. I mean, being in a good brain spot helps us be healthier and all the way around.
Yeah.
In my story, because of the approach, and if it's different for somebody and they're just stressed because they don't feel that their student is like learning anything, like it's just kind of going over their head, what is your recommendation for the course?
Well, I mean, number one, I think to kind of evaluate what things are working. I know one of the elements was the word find. There are words that are highlighted. We try to make sure there were no two words the same throughout a semester, and that took a lot of work to do. But if that becomes overwhelming to do that, you could, I would say, scale it back, or don't do it at all. If it's something that has become problematic and is just creating stress, look at the parts of it that are really helping and being a benefit to the child. You're at a stage in first and second grade where you're just learning the basics. You don't have to overwhelm a child with learning things. It's not, trigonometry or something like that. You're looking at the basics. You want them to enjoy it. So find the things that they find the most joy in and try and build on those. There might be elements that you do have to skip, and I understand that. That's once you get the course, any of our courses, you're the teacher. The parent is the teacher. They can decide. We always did that with whatever we had at home. We realized, hey, if we don't want to do this element of it, we don't have to. We don't have to, make a big deal out of it. We're just going to skip that element because it doesn't seem to work with our kids.
Right.
But most of this, if you understand the philosophy behind it, why it's a part of my story, that might help to understand, okay, we can be patient. It's not an overwhelming course. It's something that's meant to be joyful. So, kind of help bring out those aspects of it, the joy of learning and experiencing and understanding new things. Find out why maybe something isn't working. Find out from the child. Ask them, what is it about this that is frustrating to you, or that you just don't like to do, and see if there's something, maybe a way you can talk with them about learning. Right. There are times we have to just be patient and learn to be patient as a teacher. Sometimes if we're in a class, we have to learn to be patient with ourselves, and we just have to learn certain things. Yeah. But this is a course that's meant to be hopefully more of a joy, that you're learning in this environment, and it shouldn't be something that is hopefully stressing a child out. So. Yeah. And in first and second grade, there's still so many connections that are being made that, one task or one approach may be more difficult. Doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way for the next 2 or 3 years. They may just be developing the skills and the stamina to do that. Right. Exactly. Because we notice that when parents are selecting to do it for upper elementary, where they've developed more of the skills, it's like they grasp kind of what the heart is that's happening. Okay. So, but yeah, I think one of the beauties of Master Books, right? We work like the publishing industry. There's been curriculums that have been published now for 30, 40 years on the market. If you think about it, there hasn't been a lot new come out of the education field. Like the biggest discovery to come out of the education field was the blackboard, because that gave the teacher the ability to actually write on and address everybody in the class. Classrooms haven't changed in 100 years. I mean, they're still the same approach for the most part. What we have an advantage of as a publisher today, developing new curriculum all the time, is we're able to look at the benefits of cutting edge techniques and approaches. And I think that as we develop more curriculums, we get more excited about it.
as we go to make it so learning is fun, it's engaging, it's application based. It's not just knowledge in, knowledge out that a lot of us grew up with in a classroom.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It is an exciting thing to be a part of Master Books and developing this, because it's things I see that I wish we'd had, especially the younger kinds of things for our kids. We didn't have a lot when we started homeschooling. We still were wondering, is this the right thing to do? We found a group that we could meet with, so that helped some. Mm-hmm. But there were a lot of times we just went to the library and checked things out because we didn't have a lot of money to buy a curriculum. So I love that Master Books is new and inventive. I love that it's not expensive. Some of the things we bought, I remember one was like spelling words. It was somehow we came up with $100 for something that was just, it wasn't even bound. It was just loose leaf. And I thought, oh my word, that's a lot of money for just a little printout of stuff. But I love that this company has a real heart for homeschool families and develops things with a knowledge of what they struggle with, what they're facing. Mm-hmm. When it comes to these the 8 areas of intelligences, I would look over that with your whole family, with your spouse. I think it's probably not a bad idea to understand your spouse's area of intelligence and how they learn and how they communicate, so you can communicate better as a whole family. Mm-hmm. Not just in the learning environment itself, but at home and at work and such. So
because that could definitely be a friction point.
Oh yeah.
So awesome. Well, again, we have the copy of the My Story teaching notes. We've attached it to the description of this video, and it's also on the product pages for My Story. If you're using My Story, this gives you just a little bit more insight into the intelligence that were discussed, which of the exercises Craig was going, like copy work, verbal linguistic, flag time is visual spatial. God's creation time, naturalist, government time, logical math, helping hands focused on the interpersonal intelligence, language time, verbal linguistic, and musical. Twice.
Yeah, well, because it's for each.
For each of the.
There's a different language, so that's why it's on there twice.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
My Story, journal, interpersonal, picture time, visual spatial. It's spatial.
It's very special.
Talk time, verbal linguistic, thankful time, interpersonal. And so it gives each of these kind of, so you really have a good idea of what Craig and Andrew were trying to accomplish in teaching the subject. We'd encourage you, we've talked in the past about having a vision statement, being cutting edge of learning. We had encouraged for a mission statement, excellence in learning. And we just encourage you as an educator to be willing to be creative in understanding who your child is as an individual, how to best reach them and meet their needs, how to grow them, and then giving yourself room for growth to know you don't have to be perfect. Education is not perfect. We have 9 children, and each child is completely different, and every year they change. As their hormones change, as their experiences in life change, as their needs change, so does the way we have to teach them. And so we can't really ever rest on our laurels because, what worked last year with my sons doesn't always work this year. And we have to be willing to make changes. So staying flexible and realizing there is no such thing as perfection or cookie cutter or average. And we just have to be flexible that way.
And I think that's one of the things that we found was just the greatest joy of homeschooling, because homeschooling is, I would never tell anyone it's easy, but I would always tell people that it's definitely worth it. Mm-hmm. But just that we were able to see them, we were able to meet them each at their own they were very different. They developed very differently. And so we could meet those needs. Whereas if we had just put them in a classroom of, 30 people or something, they might very well have just kind of been pulled along, not necessarily seen as an individual that that you can actually meet their needs directly.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's such a joy about homeschooling is if a child is going a little bit slower at the first, you don't have to push them.
Mhm.
You don't have to rush them. You can let them develop at their own pace because that's how God designed them. He didn't design us all to be exactly the same and to develop exactly the same at the same pace.
Right.
That's not how we were designed. And so why would we teach that way? We want to teach on a way where we can reach each child at their own pace and at their own level. And I think that's just a wonderful thing about homeschooling.
Now, if somebody went to do my story in first grade and he noticed the student just was struggling a little bit, you would say it'd be okay to slow down and do my story 1 over a 2-year period and just go a little slower, do it as a read aloud together. Yeah. And maybe just the activities that they could do. And then in the second year, like just break it up a little bit and stretch it out over a period of time.
I think that would be fine.
The goal is learning. It's not finishing the book. The goal is actually learning.
Right.
So, and making connections.
That's an excellent way to look at it. I think that it could definitely be done however the parent feels like this will best reach my child. That can be done for sure. That wouldn't be anything I would ever say, oh no, you've got to do it in the year.
Yeah.
You have it, you know best what's best for your child.
Right.
And that would be a great way to adapt it, I think. So
okay. Well, I am here with Craig Froman, the author of My Story and many other books, and also the editor here at Master Books. If you have a question about My Story, please feel free to comment here. Craig and I will be watching comments for the next day or so. Be sure to comment for a chance to have 2,500 reward points added to your account as well. That gives you $25 of buying power at masterbooks.com if you were so fortunate as to have that put in. And we pray that this gives you some insights and that the teaching notes give you a little bit. So even if you're not using My Story, I would still encourage you to download that and take a look at it and kind of open yourself up to multiple intelligences and just to have an awareness that we all learn different and we're all very different. We have an adopted son who has fetal alcohol syndrome, which basically the drinking causes brain damage, which means that connections in the brain, the neural pathways, were damaged. And it's very interesting because those connections that are supposed to happen just can't. And it's like a person who has a stroke and can't speak anymore, or, can't calculate math, but they could still talk, those types of things. And the brain is so amazing. We are so fearfully and wonderfully made. And one of the best things we can do with our children is to ask for wisdom. James, in the book of James, it says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask for wisdom, believing he's received it, and he will receive it. And it's a promise that God gives us that if we come to him and ask him for wisdom in raising our children and working with coworkers and understanding the way our spouse communicates, if we ask him for wisdom and we believe that he does answer that prayer, his word says that we will get that. And so the number one thing I think we can do as we approach our students and any curriculum and the learning process is to pray and ask that he gives us wisdom. As you sit there with your halo. Hey guys, hope this was beneficial, and we pray you have a good week. And we will talk to you on Thursday, Teaching Tips Thursday.